So just reviewing where we left off then. So we see, just looking at our tables here, we've added our updated by and created by columns to the doctor table. The patient, we did the same thing, but just for updated. We aren't so much worried about the created. And we did also add our timestamp field, right? The other thing was the index on the OHIP, so it's enforced to be unique. No two people can have the same OHIP number. So those were the basic table design changes that we made last week. And then we did add under programmability here a couple of scalar functions. One was our sort of general here. Let me just bring up the scripts for these again. Script function as a create. So the first one was basically our approach where we pass in the parameters for first, middle, and last name, right? And then we just, depending on our fourth parameter was a format, okay, that we can ask for a full format or a formal format. In other words, like last name, comma, first name, as opposed to first name, last name. And that's just the different expressions used. But all the data is passed in. It doesn't have to do any work going out to the database. So in the instructions for the exercise, though, we were asked to create a variation on this. I'll just bring that one up. And the difference here basically is our parameter is just the ID, what doctor it is. So we don't have the name information, which is why we had to use a select filtering for that doctor ID we're given to go and get the first, middle, and last name components. After that, our expression was very much the same, except we did, as per the instructions, hard code in doctor, right? And notice that this is specifically for doctor, whereas that other one was reusable to any table where we had name information, right? We could have just, because we're just passing the name values in, it doesn't matter. This is hard coded to get the information from doctor. So this function is only useful for doctor. You might say, well, why bother? That one's kind of more flexible. Well, the advantage sometimes of this kind of a function, as you'll see how it's used in the view, it means we can go and pull information from the doctor table without involving the doctor table in our from clause itself, right, of a select statement. So instead of having a join going out and including that in the query, anytime we want from anywhere in the system, we can just say, give me the doctor name, I know the ID, right? And it can concatenate it together and give it to me, whether it's in a view or anywhere else. So sometimes this is a good arrangement to do. It's not right or wrong, it's just whatever works in the situation you have. So finally, the last thing we did was our view, right? If I script this again, script view as create. This was just a basic select. I think I might have modified this a little bit, but just returning, according to our rule of thumb, all the actual fields in the table itself. In addition, I used that name one just for the fun of it, just to use all that work we did. Passing in the first name null, because there is no initial field, so just pass null in the patient table, and the last name to get the patient name in formal name format, just as a summary field. Might be useful in the user interface. We've included the timestamp, because we'll need that so we can compare it later on and see if it's changed. It's a design decision whether or not we include the audit fields. Usually auditing is left to a separate function, right? You'll run various auditing reports and so on. Usually the client interface, unless there's a particular need or request to see actually who has last updated the record, we don't normally show that on the screen. It's mainly for internal purposes to track, who's done what in the system. So if you wanted to, you could include those in the projection of the select command. It's not right or wrong either way. It's just whatever you need. I tend to leave them out unless there's a particular reason why I have to include them. Okay? So I'll leave those out. We did use my new doctor name function here so that, again, our from clause doesn't involve the doctor table, right? But because I have the foreign key value in my patient table, I know what doctor ID it is, I can let the function go and find out the full name of the doctor without modifying my from clause to have a join and all that stuff. Okay? It's not right or wrong, it's whatever works best in your situation. So this is just created as a view, so we have it as an object, and clearly we can select from it, right? Select star from B_patient. And running that, You can see the kind of output we're getting here. We have a bit of a summary field, all the separate fields. Our doctor ID is the foreign key that lives in patient table. Very important we include that. But we've eagerly loaded also the full name of the doctor coming from our function, right? It goes to the doctor table and looks it up for us. And we also have our timestamp, so we'll be able to compare, because when I get the data, this is the timestamp of the record that I've been given to work with. If I make changes and send it back, I'll make sure I include this in what's gone back. So we're going to see how we can actually create a stored procedure to compare and decide if a change has been made. That's in the next part coming up. So that, in a nutshell, is where we've left off in our development. Any quick questions before we go on? Okay. All right. Well, I'm just going to actually close that up for now. So getting back to our PowerPoint, let's move it over here. Otherwise it does the whole thing. So our most common stored procedures, right? Clearly we need some stored procedures that will return data to the client application. Obviously, one of the things that we often ask for is a single record, like you bring up a customer, right? Maybe you want to edit information about a customer, for example. So we'll do that. Another thing is we might want all the records from a given record set. So like all the customers, we might put it in a grid of some sort so we can flip down through them, right? Along with that, there might be variations where we're setting our queries up to filter by one thing or another. Most common thing to filter by are foreign keys, right? So if you have any foreign keys, like in our case, the patient has a foreign key for the doctor, then we might create an interface in the client where you say which doctor and just see the patients for that one doctor. Hopefully they might have the option to say all doctors as well, maybe in a drop-down list, right? And then we can see all patients regardless of doctor, or if we want to filter in on Dookie Howser's patients, we can just see them, right? So whenever you have a foreign key, that's a good candidate for filtering by. Of course, we might have other things as well. We're going to do a whole segment on creating stored procedures for flexible filtering, dynamic filtering later on, but just mentioning it quickly now. Another one that we'll often do in terms of a data returning stored procedure is things for those drop-down lists. We often call them, refer to that as lookup data, right? Our foreign keys are often like that. You know, you might have a list of provinces, so you're going to select province out of a list. Well, to populate that drop-down list with all the provinces, for example, we'll usually create a stored procedure to return the data because there's usually some things that we ideally want in the arrangement of data to show in the drop-down list. Okay? Usually these things have two, count them, two fields. That's all you return. One is usually the primary key, and that's stored internally as the value of the selected item in your drop-down. And the other is the text to display. So that might be a single field, but think of it like those summary fields that we've talked about a few times now, right? That one piece of information that kind of fully describes. So it might be last name, comma, first name if you're talking about people, right? Something like that. Okay. We talked about movies as an example, where you might have the title of the movie and dash and the year it was produced, right? And that together might populate a drop-down list very nicely, so you can select the movie and know which version was it, the 1959 version or the 1984 version. So that's the kind of information. Those two columns will usually return for a lookup data type stored procedure. Oh, the other thing is sorted. We all know that when you, whether it's in a web interface or in a Windows interface, when you click a drop-down list, thank goodness they're almost always sorted, right? So you can start hitting the first letter, maybe the second letter, and jump in the list down, right? If there's a big long list, you can start jumping into the list alphabetically. But that only works if it's sorted. If it's not, you're out of luck. So that's the other thing those little lookup stored procedures will do, is we'll sort them in alphabetical order. Okay, now the other things are our action queries, insert, update, and delete. At this point, I'll just emphasize, notice it says insert a new record into the table. Update a specific record, delete a, right? So, of course, we all know that we can update whole groups of records at a time, but depending on the where clause, if we're writing an ad hoc update command. But for practical use, usually we'll set up these stored procedures to facilitate working from a client application to work with one record at a time. Insert one, update one, delete one record. And that's how most client applications work, right? So you'll see.
Use alter as an action query? I mean, is alter not an action query?
No, it's not.
Oh.
Alter is a data definition language query that we alter the definition of a stored procedure, or alter the structure of a table, right? But in terms of our action queries, it's insert, update, and delete. Update is what you're thinking of. Update is where you change an existing record, right? Okay. So just to get into a little further, select with no restriction. So we usually have like a select all type of stored procedure. Select by the primary key value. That's when we want to go get one. Usually the best thing, or the easiest, is always to identify it by the primary key, right? And then those are our main two select stored procedures. Then our three inserts, just to flush that out a little bit more. They're all working with one record at a time, but because of our dual key system we commonly use, we usually have a programmer's key as a primary key. Maybe it's an integer, it might be a GUID, but whatever it is, okay, the system is usually going to generate it for us, generated by the database system itself. So we won't know the value of this new primary key. So it's just a courtesy when we design these stored procedures. Any insert stored procedure usually should return the newly generated ID value. The client might need to know that, so why not give it to them, right? That way it's the same stored procedure could be used whether you actually have to have it or not. Sure, it's true that in many cases the client might not care, okay? At this point in time it doesn't need to know, but if it does, you want to make sure you're providing it. So it's a standard approach on how we write the insert. Give them the new ID, whether it's an integer or anything else. For the update, well, we've talked about in our practical application development version control as well as auditing, right? So for version control, we need the timestamp so that we can then compare it. Our update stored procedure will do just that. We'll pass the timestamp back, and it can compare it with the current timestamp just in the where clause. If it matches, if it's the same, then we know that no one else has touched the record and we're safe to update it. If it has changed, then our where clause will simply eliminate it and we just won't update anything. And we can easily check and see whether something was changed or not. Delete works the same way, right? If we decide to implement version control, away we go. You might not need to, okay? Again, there's not a right or wrong here. It's whatever the client requires. In many cases, if you're talking about deleting a record, you might say, well, why worry about if somebody else has modified it in the meantime? But then again, you might say, well, maybe I shouldn't be deleting it if somebody else has just changed it, right? So that's up to you. It's whatever you decide under the circumstances. So really, what I have in the next few slides are recipes, right? No, we're not going to break any eggs, at least I hope not, okay? But we are going to follow some recipes for creating these standard stored procedures to make them kind of reusable and universal in a sense in our application. Okay, so we have some assumptions to apply these recipes. Our assumption is that the table has an integer identity. That's how I've written up these example recipes. We're going to assume there's an integer identity primary key. Bada bing, bada boom. We have a timestamp field just for these examples, right? If you don't, then you just leave it out. Okay, but to follow the recipe, we're assuming you do. And I'm going to assume that for now you actually have an updated by and updated on audit fields as well. Again, if you don't, then you just leave that portion out of the recipe, right? If you have created it on and created by, then we'll deal with that as well. Okay, so our first simple one is select all. Now, whatever naming convention you like, you can follow. Just try to be consistent. I usually go the table name first, and then sort of the action of the stored procedure. So it might be, for example, for a patient, it might be patient select all would be the name of my stored procedure. And then all it is we have a select command where we return all rows. So there's no where clause. We're just returning all the data, right? But notice, of course, we are setting no count to on because it's returning data anyway, so we'll suppress those extra messages about how many rows are affected. I get mixed up all the time because it's so back double negative, right? Yeah. Triple negative, I think it almost is. Anyway, all right. So we can select either from directly from the table, or if we have one of these nice eagerly loaded views, we'll use it instead. Okay. Next, select table by ID. Okay, so it might be patient by ID. Here's where we're passing in our primary key, right? To say that's the one and only record I want you to return. The projection is exactly the same. So the only change we make to the body of the stored procedure is we add the where clause, filtering by the primary key. And of course we have to add the parameter so we can pass an ID. There were no parameters in our select all. So we added a parameter, and now we've said we're going to use that in the where clause. The data returned, the columns and everything else is exactly the same. Okay? And that could be from, again, a view or a table. All of the action queries work directly with the table, not the view. Odds are the view is probably read-only anyway, the way we've set them up, right? All those columns that are being manipulated, they aren't actually in the table anywhere. You can't insert data into them, right? So we'll insert into the table itself. So of course we'll have a parameter list, right? So we'll have as many parameters as we need for the table. We've seen this before. You did one in one of our exercises. Create a parameter for every field, same data type. Okay? If it allows null, then optionally you can say equals null, right? Make it an optional parameter and so on. If we're assuming we have our updated by field, so we would actually create a parameter for updated by, and I would usually set that equal to null because during development, the client application might not be ready to provide the information yet, so you don't want to be held up from calling the stored procedure, okay, if you don't have anything to provide it. And of course, we're inserting. So as a courtesy, we want to tell whoever calls my procedure to run what the new ID being generated is, my new integer identity, right? So when we use an output parameter, you could argue with me and say, well, I could just set returns because stored procedure can return an integer. You're not wrong, okay? But I tend to use an output parameter just because that way data type is much more flexible. In case you're going to get into GUIDs or something like that instead of an integer in some circumstances. Anyway, so then we have our as, and this time we're setting no count off, right? And that will be true of all of our action query stored procedures, right? And then we just, set updated by in case it was null, right? So if the client isn't providing it yet, I'm just substituting, probably just go with my usual unknown.
What's that n before the unknown?
In case it's n varchar.
Oh,
Okay,
right.
n before the literal string is just a way to let the compiler know that treat this as Unicode as opposed to ASCII.
Quick reminder,
text.
n varchar?
N varchar.
N, yeah, could you remind me what n is?
The n means we're using Unicode character set to store the text. Takes twice as much room for every character, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then when we're done inserting, right? Oh, by the way, you'll notice that for the updated on, we don't even need a parameter. We'll just use getDate, right?
Yeah.
That's optional. You might pass a date from the client, but usually we just let the server look after it. And the updated by, of course, if a value was passed in, we're going to use it. If not, we've substituted our own unknown, right? And then afterwards, we just select our scope identity to get the new ID, setting that to the output parameter. Okay. So that's our insert. Oh, sorry, I skipped a slide. That's didn't look right for a second there. Okay, update is very similar. Again, all the same arrangement here. Of course, with an update, we don't have an output parameter at all, though, right? We actually pass in the ID. That's usually how we know which record we're updating is by the primary key. So we do our updates. And here in the where clause, though, at the bottom, you'll see that's where we're doing our concurrency. There's no concurrency for an insert. How could there be? Nobody else could have the record. You're making it brand new, right? But for an update, in our where clause, we first of all check that we do have the right record by the ID. That's the one that we want to update. Then we can also compare the timestamp right in the where clause. That way, if it's been changed, then we don't actually update it. How will we know? Well, we set no count to off, so we'll get back a message saying 0 rows affected. And in the client, we can decide, okay, well, the only reason for that would be concurrency.
It won't show like the number of rows affected if we set no count on, right? No count on, then it won't show that, right?
Yes, that's right. It won't show up if you set no count to on.
Right.
Okay, and then delete is the simplest of all. You might even not have a timestamp involved, right? In any test or question, I'll tell you whether you should or shouldn't, okay? But for completeness, I included it here, so we won't delete the record if somebody else has changed it since we brought our copy up on the screen. Other than that, away we go. So we're ready for some more fun, right? Yeah, fun. All right, so what we're going to do is let me just open a new query. Yeah, I'm working in my medical office here. and we're going to create those standard stored procedures. I believe that's what the instructions call us to do, right? So we're on number 6, create the 5 standard stored procedures, patient select all, select by ID, insert, update, and delete, right? So let's see how quickly I can get through this. Create procedure, user stored procedure, and again, my naming convention I usually stick with is the name of the table, and then the name of the action. So select all will be my first, right?
What was USP?
User stored procedure,
Yeah,
right? Now there's no parameters, so I can just go right into my as, right? And for completeness, I'll maybe put a begin end. And of course we want to set no count. Yeah. Might as well do it all in caps for clarity. Set no count now, is it on or off?
Off, I guess.
Right? Because we want to suppress the messages because it's going to return data, right? So I have my V patient. Now, of course, you should never actually do a select star. It looks amateurish for one thing. Besides, it's dangerous. It's dangerous because if they make a change to the table, suddenly you're getting new fields you weren't expecting, and that might cause problems. You're better to catch that early by actually specifying, but I'm lazy, so I like to do that, bring it up in the query design tool, and just click OK. And that it automatically generates all the fields for me, so I don't have to do them. Laziness 101, that's the name of my course. Okay, so there we go. So we have all the fields here. So including my timestamp, because that was in my view. I have my eagerly loaded doctor information and everything else. So that basically is it. I'm done. Okay, one down. I'll click execute. Woohoo! No syntax errors. It must have compiled okay. All right, so let's go on. Do number 2. Select one at a time, right? So by ID.
Sorry, how do you make your select star turn into all fields?
You just highlight it, bring it up in the query design tool, and just click OK.
No, I just did that. I didn't get it. Like, well, I press Control Shift Q to get to it. If that matters.
Yeah, no, it shouldn't matter. If you bring it up in design view, and then just click OK, when it comes back, it will actually just write it this way. All right, so the difference with by ID is I need my parameter at ID, int, and I'm just going to add that where clause. Equals at ID. So it's going to, the projection is exactly the same, all the same columns. That should be true of any select procedures you do. I'm just now filtering for one and only, by ID. Okay, 2 down. Now, the next ones are going to be action query based, right? So I might as well start with the insert. Okay, patient insert. Now I'm going to need a lot more parameters than just that. In fact, this one is going to become a output parameter. I don't tell it the new ID, it generates it for me. Okay? However, before that then, I'm going to have all of my other ones. Actually, the order doesn't matter that much, right? But it's just my habit. Output parameters I tend to put at the end. Okay. So how are we going to get this in place? Well, you know what? While I'm here, I'm going to just think about what else do I need to change. Know that I'm going to have an action stored procedure here.
Set it
Off. Right. Oop. Okay. All right. So one of the ways that can help us is to have the system generate the insert command for us. I've showed you that before. So if I come down here to the patient table, okay, I can right click, script table as an insert, right? Just a new query window. Now eventually I'll use the whole insert, but right at the moment, let me just focus in on this for a second. If you grab all this stuff down here, we saw before this was useful when we're making up data. It gives you a hint right away of what kind of data has to be and so on. But right here, I can copy this, Control C. I'll come back to my stored procedure that I'm writing. I need to make all those parameters, right? Well, a little bit of search and replace can be a very powerful thing, okay? I just put a comma there so it would match the other ones. Well, there's, I don't know, actually I could leave that out. What I could do is I could do a search and replace for this left angle bracket, okay, and make it a an @ symbol. So Control H, the left angle, make it an @ symbol, replace all, okay. Now they're all set up as parameters. Now I want to get rid of this comma that's between here. So you got to be careful because there's commas elsewhere, right? So make sure you highlight the region of text you want to be editing, right? So it's selected. Then I can come up here and say replace comma space with just a space, okay? You can't see it, but I did type a space in there, and just change it to selection. And now I took all the commas out after the names. Now here, okay, the comma greater than symbols, yeah, let's get rid of them. Comma greater than, replace with, well, I've got the commas at the front here. I mean, it's 6 1/2, so I guess basically nothing, right? So I can just delete, have nothing in there. Again, in the selection section, replace. Okay. So I've got the commas. I usually leave the commas up there, but 6 1/2 dozen the other. I need a comma in front of this one then to be consistent. And so as long as you get it so they're all acceptable parameters in the end, okay, it's kind of a nice trick. Okay, so you know there's what, 7 or 8 columns here. Some tables you've got 30 or 40, so it can really save a lot of time when you get really big tables that way. Okay, now of course we actually have to have the insert statement here, so let me go back and steal the rest of it. And actually I could have done some of the search replace with this in place as well, I suppose. Once again, let me highlight this region for my search and replace business. And Control H, so again, replace the greater than, or the, yeah, that one. Now, to a degree, there's not much I can do here because, you know, the data types are all different. So it's often just as fast as anything just to backspace out, just select from the end of the line back to the end of the parameter name, and then press delete. Okay, so now I have all my parameters coming in. The ID is going to be set up for output. Oh, I don't need updated on unless I really want to let the client pass date time information, but usually we just do that on the server, so I can take that one out. Okay, and down here I am going to provide a value for updated on, but in our recipe it showed setting updated by equal to null, just so that it's an optional parameter for now. You could, if you want to, take time and actually make anything that allows null equal to null as well. That would be totally acceptable to do. It's not a requirement, but it's acceptable. So before we actually do the insert, we should set my updated by equal to using isNull. So if I have a null coming in, then I can, now I'm not using in varchar here, I just have varchar for my data type, so I can just say unknown. Okay, so that way it replaces it with our value. Okay, so down here we'll actually pass the updated by. For our updated on, well, we aren't going to return anything here. What we're going to do is we're going to actually use get date. So we'll insert. Okay, by the time we're done, we've supplied values for everything, including updated by, which might just be our canned answer of unknown if we don't have an actual piece of information to follow. We're almost done. That should complete the insert. So the last thing is that, as a courtesy, we're going to set our output parameter, right? At ID equal to scope identity and where row count equals 1. Again, the reason for select. I like to use select, that way I can use the where clause, and it's like a decision structure for free, right? Because if I don't have any row count, nothing was inserted, no point asking for scope identity because there's nothing there. Okay, so I thought that's a little tall, I know, to see on the screen all at once. Okay, but I will post the script with all this in it when we're all done. Any questions about that? Well, execute. 3 out of 5 down. I know I'm going fairly quick, but I'm recording it. Okay, the next one would be our updates. Be consistent. Now, with update, we have all the same parameters coming in, right? Including our updated by. The only difference is we start off, it could be there. Okay, our ID is no longer an output parameter. Okay, I should be consistent, sorry. Okay, so we just have it as an input parameter along with everything else, right? And down here, we'll still leave set no count to off for all of our action ones. I can still leave this in place. Okay, I'll substitute in case I don't have a value. It's really just the insert. I'll get rid of that. And I don't even need this business down here, right? So it's a pretty straightforward up to there. I just need to get what an update looks like. Well, I can have the system help me with that. Right click, go down to script table as an update. And I'll just grab the actual update command itself out of here. Fortunately, my parameters, I'm done with this one, I can just close it. My parameters are already all set up, right? So, update patient, setting all these fields, etc. So I can do some of the same kind of search and replace kind of work I did a minute ago. What I could do is, again, change these left angle brackets, okay, to the @ symbols in the selection, replace all. And there's not much more I can do here, so let's just get rid of, again, the last portion, right? Just manually delete that. It's up to you if you want to type it from scratch, feel free, but I usually find that this is quicker. I'll have to make a change there, of course, because our updated on doesn't come from a parameter. There is no such parameter. It's getDate. All the other values will come from parameters, but our where clause, right? That's where we match on the primary key. ID equals @ID. Now, we do have a timestamp parameter here, right? Oh! Why don't I have a timestamp? Does my table not have... That is so strange. Huh. Oh, it doesn't because I didn't regenerate the parameters for the update. For the insert, it doesn't give you a parameter for timestamp because it supplies it automatically. Sorry. It's my fault, right? I have to manually add a parameter for timestamp.
For the test, are we working in these same databases?
For this test, yes, you are.
What if
But you
some-
don't have to. None of this is on the test.
Yeah, because some of our databases aren't as updated. Like I don't know, I'm missing a create view that you've done previously, which is why I couldn't just okay.
Okay, so I just added the timestamp as a parameter because we'll need that for update. Sorry, I didn't need it for insert, but I certainly do here. And so down here, I'll need to update and, right, here's where I use the timestamp. At timestamp. So that will have the effect that if the timestamp is changed, then it will not actually update any records. And we'll know that from the actual, oh, get rid of that. We'll know that from the message on how many records were updated. Okay, almost there. That's our update, which was, sorry, the timestamp there threw things off a little bit. Now, the last and the easiest one of all is delete, right? So patient delete. All we need is the int, really, although I'll leave timestamp in for now as well, right? So I'll take all these other parameters out. I'll just leave the 2. Set no count off still. We're done with this. We don't need that. I can just change this to delete.
Are you regenerating it?
What's that?
You're regenerating it? Like every parameter?
Um,
Are you going to?
no. Well, I'm just delete from. I just need my where clause, right? So that's the whole procedure to delete. So I pass in the ID and the timestamp, right? I just compare the ID and the timestamp. If they match, then I delete the record. Simple as that. At most 1 because of the primary key, maybe none if it's been modified by somebody else. Set no count off, bada bing. So that's it. I should be able to come over here now, scrolling down to programmability. 1, 2. Oh, did I miss one? Did I never run the? I never actually ran the script on when I had the update. Darn. Oh, can I just Control Z a few times? So I get my update back again. Okay. Good old Control Z. It works for some things, right? Doesn't work for data changes, but. Okay, so now I have my 5 standard stored procedures. All right. So we're almost out of time, so I guess we'll wrap it up there. We'll have to continue on in our discussions. And okay, the only thing left are our list style stored procedure for the doctor table. And then we're going to just, for the doctor itself, we didn't do any stored procedures for it, but just to see how we can do concurrency control just with a date time field. We're going to say, well, we don't have a timestamp, but we'll get pretty good control for the frequency of updating doctors just using the updated on field and comparing the date times. So that'll be our last 2 steps. Sorry we didn't quite get time for that, but we got pretty good. Okay, thank you.